Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being a part of this conversation this afternoon. We're here to talk about ESSER, the American Recovery Act. I'll be speaking a little bit about the background around the American Recovery Act, and then we'll be looking to get some feedback around some of the strategies that we would like to put in place, as well as to share some of the survey results that went out to the community recently. So with that being said, I think we're expecting some more families to be joining us. In the interest of time, we'll go ahead and get started, and Doug will just allow them in as they come in. At the beginning of this meeting, I was trying to get the lighting in my office right, so I apologize all the bouncing back and forth. It's pretty bright outside. So I think it's I'm a little bit easier to see now. So I'll go ahead and pull up the presentation. Every several slides, there's a couple points in there where I'll stop. And I'll be able to answer any questions that you might have. So everything we do in the district is connected to our district vision as well as our mission. And if you ever wonder where every student every day comes from, it comes from our mission, which is to enable every student to think critically, solve problems, and to develop the knowledge and skills necessary for success in our diverse and global society. And then last year, the Board of Education approved our first equity statement in the history of the district. Every presentation that we deliver at the board level has to have a reference to the equity statement as it relates to this ESSER work. The specific component of the equity statement is treating everyone with dignity and respect by valuing individual perspectives and cultural diversity, and prioritizing our interactions with every parent, student, guest, and colleague. So the fact that we're going out seeking feedback as we develop this plan is directly in line with the equity statement. So a little bit of background, going back to March of 2020. March of 2020 is when COVID first started impacting schools and really just started impacting the world. There was ESSER 1, which was the first influx of federal money to try to offset the impact of COVID on schools. What that meant for Ritenour was $1.3 million in funding. And what that ESSER 1 money allowed us to do was to allow us to keep staff members whole. So bus drivers, custodians, those staff members that a number of districts were either riffing or furloughing, we use that federal money to keep everybody whole and ensure that everybody was paid through the end of the year, even though they weren't able to be as engaged as they were in the past. ESSER 2 is what we're in the middle of right now. ESSER 2, which amounted to $7.2 million in funding, allowed us to make the increases in staffing that we made this year. We added 25 positions to our budget this year, with of those 25, 17 of them being new positions tied to either social emotional staff or academic interventionists. And then ESSER 3. So ESSER 3 was signed into law in March 2021. It's also known as the American Rescue Plan. It was really one of the first big pushes by the Biden administration to support schools and school districts across the country. The goal, as you can see, is to award funds to address the impact of COVID, just was the same as ESSER 1 and 2. Under ESSER 3, there's much more accountability to the expenditure of the funds, making sure that the spending of money is closely tied to the goals in the American Rescue Plan. You'll see that in just a bit. It allows districts to get back to school 5 days in person which was really President Biden's intent in pushing ESSER 3, making sure that all schools are back open 5 days in person. And then it was on the districts to decide if there would be a virtual option. If you remember last year, we had a hybrid option that we remained in pretty much all year. And that was a combination of in-person. At the end of the year, it was 4 days in person and 1 day virtual. In the state of Missouri, there's no longer an option to have a hybrid plan. It's either 5 days in person or fully virtual. Just one last thing about ESSER 3. It's a one-time influx of funds. The total amount of funds that we're receiving is just a shade over $15 million in federal funding, which is a significant amount. The funds have to be expended by September of 2024, and we have to have a draft plan uploaded by August 23rd, which is in 11 days. So I'll stop there and see if there's any questions on what I've shared to this point. Okay. Some more ESSER 3 requirements. And so the first draft of the plan has to be updated on the 23rd of August, as I shared. We had to hit the timeline of June 23rd to have our updated return to learning plan available on our website, and we did that. We have to develop and get feedback in developing the plan with students, families, administrators, teachers, principals, and so on. Broad-based representation is the exact language that's in the requirements. Moving on with other requirements, and to the extent present in or served by Ritenour, develop the application and plan in consultation with disability and civil rights groups, stakeholders representing those students that meet the following demographic. And of all of the 15 million or just over 15 million, at least 20% of the funds expended have to address learning loss of students due to missing school through the use of evidence-based interventions. And so 15.2 million, 20% of that is just a little bit over $3 million, have to be expended to ensuring that the interventions respond to academic, social, and emotional needs, to ensuring that the interventions address the impact of COVID on underrepresented student groups, and also when we're talking about interventions, that can be materials and programs, or it can also be the hiring of people. So the way that we interpret the requirements, so some further guidance in the way we interpret it, is sometimes the term supplanting. When you have an influx of new money, you're not able to, because of this influx of new money, hold back on local funding and come out budget neutral. In fact, this is 15 million in additional dollars above and beyond the current budget that was approved, that's just under 80 million. So we're not able to reduce per pupil funding. We're not able to reduce the full-time equivalent of staff members. So we're not able to reduce our interventionist staff. We're not able to reduce staff member allocations for historically underserved groups of students. So we have to maintain and actually increase above and beyond what we have at this point. The funds should be used to maintain and enhance existing plans. And although we have to have this uploaded by the 23rd of August, the thinking is that really when we do start expending these funds, we would be revising our budget at least twice per year throughout the period. And when we do go about doing that, we would pull this group back together. So I'll stop there, see if there's any questions. So the next portion of the presentation, I'm going to get into the results of the survey that we put out to the community and share some of the results, and then we'll stop before we get into the components that we would like to include in the plan. So the survey that was pushed out, it was pushed out to nearly 6,000 families, and there were two parts to the survey. The first part of it was staff and community response around masking and social distancing. The second part of the survey was feedback around ESSER 3 priorities. You can see that in a period of 3 days, we got a very strong response, 1,700 responses. You can see that it was about 1,300 staff members, or 1,300 community members, and about 400 staff members. So, the process for how the data was collected, it was done through a Google form. And then staff and families were asked to rank the 6 areas based on their level of importance. So the 6 areas come directly from the federal plan, the way that DESE interpreted it. The 6 areas are number 1, responding to COVID. So some examples of allowable expenses in responding to COVID: materials and supplies, cleaning and sanitizing equipment, air quality improvement. Addressing student learning loss, that could be summer intervention, additional programs and curriculums, could also be after-school tutoring programs. Third option is supports for underserved students disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. You can see what that includes or could include. Supporting technology, increased technology access, that could be additional devices, could be additional hotspots, could also be community connections to Wi-Fi. Addressing mental health needs, that could include programs, could include staff, and then upgrading and repairing facilities. You can see what that includes as well. So the overall findings, and I'll show the breakdown in the next couple of slides. Staff and families had some level of agreement on the top 3 areas for the funds. Those top 3 areas were number 1, which was the top, responding to COVID-19. Second in priority ranking was addressing learning loss of students. And third is that social emotional need that we are trying to be proactive around in meeting the social emotional needs of students and of staff. So here's what that looks like in terms of a bar graph. For staff members, you can see that mental health needs of staff was clear, far and away the highest priority. And then you can see addressing learning loss and supports for underserved students were a somewhat close second. When it comes to families, you can see that learning loss was the top priority. And then responding to COVID-19, technology access and mental health needs were near the top priority as well, or just below that. So I'll stop now and see if there's any questions or comments from the group. Okay, so here's some thinking. Here are some strategies or some categories of expenditures that we think are in line with the survey results and would be of great interest and benefit to students and the community. So first, that $3 million, the required 20% for evidence-based interventions, it would be targeted to maintain the current additional academic interventionists. We hired 25 additional staff members Of those, 17 are social, emotional, and academic interventionists that we've not had in place in the past. Portion of the funds would be used to maintain those people and maintain those positions on a yearly basis, because one of the things that we do know is the social emotional needs of students are not going to go away in a year. We need to sustain this effort over years to make sure that we're providing the supports that are necessary. So maintaining those academic interventionists, maintaining those social emotional staff, and then also using a portion of that $3 million to not only purchase additional programs at the recommendation of those interventionists and social emotional staff, but also to provide necessary time and training for staff members on those additional intervention programs. There is a portion that is allowable to compensate staff members for summer work, for summer learning around these interventions. So that's the first. And what you'll see is these are somewhat broad categories. That's where we want to keep it at this point. And as we get more down into the weeds, we will be doing that work with you. So the first broad category is 20% to support and maintain our current programs. The second broad category has to do with internet access to support addressing learning loss and gaps that have been created. So for the first time in the history of the district, we've become a one-to-one district. Every student has access to a device. One of the challenges that we had last year that a lot of people were involved in addressing is families did not have quality access at home. And we became really involved in the business of providing hotspots to families to give them access. We issued over 1,000 hotspots. Wasn't the best option, but it was better than nothing for our families. So knowing that virtual instruction is going to be a part of the plan moving forward, students will continue to have the choice of virtual options based on our ability to provide them. And also knowing that we will no longer have inclement weather days in Ritenour. Instead of having snow days or inclement weather days, we're able to seamlessly transition into virtual days. In order to be able to do that, students need to not only have a device, but they also have to have 24/7 access to high quality, high speed Wi-Fi. A part of the plan would be making the entire Ritenour School District community hot, making it wired with 24/7 high speed access in every home. This is known as municipal Wi-Fi. This would eliminate the need for hotspots. It's a project that is done in conjunction with the utilities to make Ritenour become a 100% wired community. 100% of our students in their homes would have access to high-speed Wi-Fi. I'll stop a moment here and see if there's any questions. So when you think about the quality of it, the quality Wi-Fi that we have here in all of our school buildings, families in their homes would essentially have that same speed, that same quality, that same uptime. Okay. So the next component of the plan. So even before COVID came along, we have a number of students that are in transition. Students that are in transition could also be known as being unhoused or homeless. The state definition is students that don't have a fixed adequate housing or a fixed adequate shelter that they rest their head in every night. The number of students that fit this category of being in transition is about 300 students. district-wide out of our 6,100 students. Students have the right, if they are in transition, to be transported back to the school and district when they became that they were attending when they became homeless or in transition. So of those 300 students, we are transporting a large number of those students in taxis from where they're currently residing, which could be in North County, could be in St. Louis City. In my 10 years, one student story that sticks out is we had a third grade student that lost fixed adequate housing when they were in third grade here in Ritenour, and they moved in with family in DeSoto, Missouri. So that student took a cab to and from DeSoto every day. So we spend about $750,000 a year in providing taxis for students that are in transition. When we got into the time of COVID, the unhoused crisis expanded. And so our plan would be to provide temporary housing for students in transition. This would be at the Husky Support Center. So we're going to have the grand opening of the Husky Support Center in 2 weeks. The second floor of the Husky Support Center is completely open. The Husky Support Center used to be a church, and it was also a parochial school. We would be turning the classrooms into dorms and then making them available for secondary students who are in transition, so that during the week, instead of students taking a cab to and from school, they would be residing at the Husky Support Center on the second floor. And they would also have access to the Ritenour Co-Care Food Pantry. They'll have access to the Husky Health Center, which is moving into the support center this fall. They would also have access to the transportation department, which has a van that would be available to transport students as necessary. It's somewhat of a riff on Jeffrey Canada's Harlem Children's Zone plan, but the goal is to have all of those wraparound services and supports in one building instead of a series of blocks. Why we believe this to be in the best interest of students in this district: the increase in the number of students in transition, it's disproportionately impacting students of color, and that's identified by data. The lack of fixed adequate housing prevents students from accessing resources that we have here in the district, such as the food pantry, such as the health center. And then also the temporary housing would allow access to all of those resources that was just shared. So this will take a significant commitment of funds for things such as we would have to install an elevator at the Husky Support Center. But we believe that the funds that we would put into the Husky Support Center would be offset, because it would be decreasing the amount of money that we would have to expend for paying for the cost of taxi cabs to transport students. The average cost to transport a student runs somewhere in the neighborhood of about $45 or $50 a day. So I'll stop here, can answer any questions about this part of the plan. So a couple of questions in the chat. And Jennifer Singleton. So this would be during the week. There's a couple of models that we're looking at. Jeff Canada's Harlem Children's Zone, but there's also Joe's Place in Maplewood, and there's also the Hope House in Jennings. There are 18 classrooms on the second floor. So it would be working in concert with our architects, working with code enforcement to determine how many total students that we would be able to have residing on that second floor. The housing would only be for students. We would not, at this point, the thinking is not that we would provide shelter and housing for the entire families. And yes, Jennifer Singleton, that is a part of the plan also in the Hope House model, as well as the Joe's Place model. There would have to be house parents or room parents who would be Ritenour staff members or Ritenour teachers, Ritenour staff members employed by the Ritenour School District that would go through a series of trainings. They would reside in the location during the week, and would be responsible for the students. Any other questions? This idea we think is very impactful. It's never about the money. Number one, it's always about how can we best serve students and families. But then it's the notion that the potential that some of the funds, or the vast majority of the funds, over the course of 7 years that we would be expending, potentially we would be able to claw all that back through reduced expenditures and cabs. Um, we think it makes sense on a lot of levels. Number one, supporting students. Number two, becoming budget neutral within a period of 6 or 7 years. Alicia had a question, and Bridget had a question too. Would meals be provided nightly for students? At this point, we don't have the capacity to provide meals for students. We don't have a cafeteria in that space right now. But that would be something that would be considered in the planning. At this point, the answer would be no. What would be the target date to have the student housing available? This would be work that we would do in concert with the architects. We would have to get a project scope together just to make sure we understand. When you buy an old building, there's often a whole lot of things you find that you didn't anticipate, and that's been true of the Husky Support Center. If there is asbestos remediation that has to be done, those kind of things, that's going to delay. That's going to delay when students would be able to get in there. So, we have to expend these ESSER funds by September of 2024, and we would have to be able to show it, if not completion by that point, significant progress by that point in working towards making that a reality. Ms. Mosley had another question. How long will the students be able to be there to stay? The thinking at this point, Ms. Mosley, is students that are considered in transition, their circumstances are reevaluated every year. So it's a conversation with the registration department every year. But, we have situations where students are in transition multiple years. And so the thinking with the Husky Support Center would be the same. As long as the student and family is in the same situation where they don't have fixed and adequate housing, then they would qualify for the temporary housing that we would provide. The thinking around the students not residing there over the weekend, that's the Joe's Place model. In Maplewood, students still do go back into their home environments over the weekend, and they maintain that family connection. In the Joe's Place model in Maplewood, they don't house the families either. The goal is not to remove the student from the family, but just during the week when school is in session, provide a more stable environment. Any other questions? Appreciate all your feedback. All right, so I'll pull up the last part. So the last part of what we're thinking for the plan is we still have some significant upgrades that have to be made around HVAC in the district to address indoor air quality. We've taken the steps already to place ionizers on all of the large public areas in schools. So that's cafeterias, gymnasiums. What an ionizer does is it charges the air as it's coming out of the air handlers, so that if there's bacteria or viruses, they sink to a surface, and they attach to a surface and they get killed. And that also allows it to be sanitized in a way. It takes the aerosols out of the air to some extent. So there's still more work to be done to address the air handlers. We've got some work that's going on through Prop S, but we've got other large issues like we had in 2016 at Ritenour High School. We had the supply pipe that feeds the Ritenour High School HVAC system that burst. Caused the students at Ritenour High, it caused us to be without heat in the middle of beginning of January for a period of about 2 weeks. Caused students to miss 2 days of school. The fix that was stood up at that point was a temporary fix where we replaced about 30 feet of pipe. There's actually about 300 feet of pipe that need to be replaced. And the timeline that we were given at that point was this fix will hold for 3 years. So we're already beyond that. So using some portion of the ESSER 3 money also to upgrade district HVAC and air handling, specifically the issue that we have at Ritenour High School with the supply pipe. So those are the 4 components of the plan that we're thinking at this point. $3 million devoted to academic, social, emotional people and programs, as well as training. The wiring the entire community. This is not a tech access, but this is rather addressing the learning loss because we do have some online programs. We want to make sure that every student has a device, which they do. They need to have high quality access at home. That would be the second component. The temporary housing strategy at Husky Support Center. This is in response to the impact of COVID on increasing the number of students in transition. And then improving, modernizing our HVAC systems across the district to make sure that we are appropriately circulating air throughout the buildings. So that's where we are at this point. I'll turn back over and would love to hear any other feedback that you might have. So question from Bridget, are there estimated costs for the other project ideas? Not at this point. We have a ballpark figures around the wiring the community project. The ballpark figure there is somewhere between $700,000 and $900,000 to wire the entire community. Not aware of any other wired community in the area. So this would be something that would be, there are many things that make the Ritenour community special. This would be another thing that would set the community apart. But in terms of the Husky Support Center costs, we don't have any costs yet. And then the HVAC project, we don't have any costs there yet either.
I'm just going to unmute instead of typing.
Sure.
So where would the extra funds come from if, like, let's say the housing project winds up costing, given that it's an older building, where would extra money come from as needed?
Yeah, so the amount of money that right now is targeted through ESSER 3, that's a significant amount of money. And so there's no belief that what we would need to put into the Husky Support Center to provide temporary housing, there's really no way that it would exceed the 15 million that we have, really the 12 million that we have in ESSER 3. If it were a situation where it was going to be, it was going to exhaust the entire amount, we know that we have to spend 20% on academic and social emotional interventionists. So we know we have to spend $3 million on that. When we get into the numbers, if it's a $20 million expenditure, we would pull this group back together and we would just not be able to move forward with that. In passing Prop S, we were very clear with the community in Prop S that there was going to be no Prop S dollars that were going to be devoted to the Husky Support Center. And we just want to keep that promise to the community. So if the numbers come back and they're astronomical, we just wouldn't be able to move forward with it. Anybody else can feel free to unmute and ask a question. So, much like anything, you always start up at a very high level, and that's where we are right now. We've got four areas that we want to build a plan around, and the purpose of this meeting today was to get feedback on those 4 areas. What I would hope to do is anytime we get more specifics, it might be once a quarter, I'd like to pull this group back together. As we get more specifics, we'll share those specifics with you. And, we would do this work together of making recommendations around the Husky Support Center plan, get feedback from the group around the municipal Wi-Fi plan, and just do the work, have this be the committee that makes the recommendations for moving forward and expending these funds. If there's no other feedback at this point, I'll be presenting to the board tonight. Dwight Lindhorst and I will. I'm going to share with the board that there was some conversation with the committee. At this point, I don't hear any significant opposition from the committee in any of the 4 areas. Is that accurate? Or if somebody is opposed to any of those 4 areas, please speak now.
Dr. Kilbride, I just had one, quick question. So
Sure.
I'm in support of all 4 areas. That wasn't the intention of my question. Is there a concern? Okay. What level of concern would there be once the money is expended in maintaining those additional positions that are being funded either through 1, 2, or 3?
Yeah, that's where the positions, the fact that we added 25 positions, 8 of those positions were class size reduction positions. And the interesting thing right now, Alicia, our district enrollment is down. So right now we've got 5,800 students and we normally enroll 6,200. The vast majority of that decrease in enrollment is at kindergarten. And we're down about 200 and almost 300 kindergarten students over what was projected. So, those classroom positions that are not going to have students at the beginning of the year, we're in talks about what that's going to look like in terms of them supporting. But these 17 additional positions for social, emotional, and intervention, these funds guarantee that we're able to maintain those positions through 2024. We know that, like I said in the beginning, the goal is not for those positions to drop off. So in our district budget, we're going to have to free up additional funds to make sure that those positions continue after the end of ESSER 3. We don't want to go into, because I'm meeting the new employees. We're onboarding some very high quality people. People won't stay if they believe that their position is a year to year. And so that's not at all what these are going to be. We're committed to the social, emotional, and academic health of kids. And so it's just going to have to be a process of revising budget priorities beyond 2024 to keep those positions on deck. Because, those 25 additional positions, that was about $2.5 million additional to the budget that we didn't have in it before. And so we'll just have to shift things around. Other questions? So I'm going to work with Doug Bray to schedule a quarterly meeting of this group. And so the invite will be coming out to you. And hopefully you're able to be a part of every one of these conversations to help sharpen the thinking, to move from high-level plan down to a very specific in the weeds plan that will be very impactful. If there's no other questions, I think we'll call it quits for the day. All right. Thanks, everybody, for your time.